Thank you for joining us, everybody, again. We're here for our part 3 and concluding segment with Jon Southard, the designer of Grant, the Western Campaign of 1862. In part 1, we just introduced Jon, talked about his background to wargame design, and we introduced the new game Grant, the Western Campaign of 1862. And then our second segment, which I hope you've watched already, if you haven't, be sure to check it out. We learned from Jon about why he decided to go the route of a completely new redesign of the game that was originally done, which was Grant Moves South with Grant. So a really interesting discussion we had, which drove Jon to do a new design. So since we've done that, Jon, I thought what we could do to conclude here is to do a nice, informal, quick virtual tour of the game, if that makes sense. So starting again, we've shown the cover before, but again, we're talking about Grant, the Western Campaign of 1862. And then, as I mentioned, part 2 segment, we talked about why it was a completely new redesign of the Grant Moves South. Also, again, the back cover is right here for those. It is not shown on the Kickstarter page. It will be shown on our product page. But again, we walked through this, I believe, in part 1 during our discussion. What I do want to mention here, however, when we get to the map, it is a single mounted map. So it is a mounted map that comes with the game, and it's not a paper map. So just want to point that out about the game. And again, that's something we can do that wouldn't happen with great campaigns of the American Civil War, as you mentioned, Jon, with Bukowski's system, because the scale is so different. So what I'd like to do now is focus in a little bit just to talk about the map for a moment, because again, it is a single mounted full-size map. And then is there anything you want to call out here in particular? Because again, this is a significant change from the original design that was hex-based in the 80s.
Sure. Well, you'll notice you've got the square boxes, which represent places land units can go, and then you've got the round circles, which represent the places naval units can go. Your land units are divisions and brigades, represented by the names of the individual leaders with leader ratings for each. The naval units move along the round circles, and of course there's places where they touch, and that's where troops can be landed. There can be forts built, there can be fighting between the naval units and the forts, all of which very important. And you see the arrows in those circles, which represents the current of the rivers. And as anyone who's ever handled a boat or a canoe or anything in a river knows, the current's important. It's not a flat body, not a
so that's covered in the water system. That's covered.
So well, I guess it does make a difference which direction you're going, upstream or downstream. We talked, Jon, about how this is a redesign from what was a hex-based game into a box-based game. And it's also a change in scale. The original game was 4 games, 4 turns, 4 days per turn. This is 4 turns per month, so about 1 week per turn. And that starts to have a lot of consequences for the system. And whenever you do any sort of game, the feel of it is very important. What sort of feel is it going to have? And you had here largely amateur armies. They did not have professional staffs. So to have anything like a precise mathematical feel, any kind of factor counting or hex counting or movement point counting would be completely wrong, completely the wrong feel. Okay. So this is a chit-based sequence of play. You have chits for each of the Union armies, but not the same number of chits. Grant has more. Pope has the least. Then you have 2 chits for each half of the Confederate armies, the western half and the eastern half, but then there's a wild card for Albert Sidney Johnston. So whichever side of the map he's on. Now you only get to move things once, but having more chits means you're more likely to move early. So Grant is likely to get the drop on the Confederates, but not guaranteed to. Whoever has Johnson is more likely to move earlier in the turn, but not guaranteed to. You could have all 4 Confederate forces move, or all 4 Union forces move first. You could have both Confederate both forces move first. There's no guarantees.
And that's a departure from your original design, which was I go, you go, right? It was
that was I go, you go. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's a big change right there to the game
once
system.
We decided we had boxes, now a number of things change about the mechanics as well. There is a force march mechanic where you can try to go extra. There is still a weather die roll because weather was very important, but there's also a reaction mechanic, which you have to have, reaction and interception, because if turns are going to represent a week, you can't simply let one army march around the other army's nose. I mean, that sort of thing did happen in the Civil War, but it didn't happen all the time. So there has to be a chance to react, and that reaction can be used either to intercept and force a battle or to withdraw.
Is that reaction based on having leaders, needing to have leaders with initiative at all, or is it based on something else?
it's the better leaders are more likely to be
Okay.
able to react
Interesting.
successfully. So that's a big function of better leadership. Exactly.
Okay.
And to move multiple pieces at a time, you need, again, an army leader, someone like Johnson or Grant or Buell, for example. So that's the only way you can move multiple divisions at a time, is using an army leader. So you get that realistic idea. Again, you can't simply radio control stacks at a distance from your army commander. That simply couldn't happen in this time period.
Gotcha. And I'm showing the unit counters here just to sort of introduce the counters and what the counters look like in the game. I'm just bringing up the Union, and then I'll show the Confederate setup displays, if you will.
Another interesting aspect was the combat system. I did not use a odds ratio system here. It was a fire system. So you have a fire table and rounds of fire. You have units being demoralized and retreating. When I reread this book, which is the book you start with, this is the official records of the Union and Confederate armies. What struck me was so interesting, reading again, with more experience and more years, the accounts of the battles, is how units basically stayed at full effectiveness until they were at zero effectiveness. Even if they lost a lot of guys, as long as they were in line and formed and firing, they could still be largely effective. And so the combat system reflects that. You assess casualties after the battle. During the battle, you simply have hits, which affect your morale and affect your fire to some extent. And when all units are demoralized on your side, you have to retreat. You've lost the battle. After that, you total up the casualties.
That's an interesting concept of.
Well, yeah, but it's kind of like what the commanders actually experienced. They didn't know until they took a muster the next day how many guys they had actually lost, or how many were back at the river landing and might rejoin the colors. They didn't know that. So, it's much more morale-based than it is numbers-based, which I think is accurate.
Wasn't there one formation you mentioned? I'm sorry. Was there one formation you mentioned during the campaign where they lost nearly 75% of their original size, but they were still a full body?
Oh, yeah. Well, the one I would cite for anyone who's interested in this stuff is the 16th Wisconsin Infantry, the account that's in here, the report of the Battle of Shiloh, where they clearly lost more than 75% of their manpower, but were still being used as a regiment at the end of the day, as a regiment. And the only reason they ever retreated was because they got flanked or they ran out of ammunition.
Amazing.
That was kind of the inspiration for that. So those who've played the game I did with Rich Berg, the South Mountain game, or the Shiloh game, or the Chickamauga game, which I did based on that system, will recognize a few elements of it, a little bit of the feel of those games as well in what became the combat system. Now, the naval system, that was another story. But
that's amazing. That's amazing. And then here we can see we've got pieces representing obviously the troops, the naval aspects, mines. Naval seems to have a pretty heavy look, which I know we're going to talk about when we get to the playbook. When we get to the playbook, I'm going to show the playbook. I want to go a little bit deeper into naval, but let me do a quick tour just to show everybody so this is just a setup displays. I just want to show that for the counters. But here, for example, is we have the train effects chart that comes with the game. This is probably something everybody's seeing for the first time. Very straightforward, but again, we just want to give you a better flavor of the support materials that come with the game: sequence of play, initiative tables, army movement tables, a leader casualty losses table. And
these leader casualties obviously being critically important here. You have Albert Sidney Johnson being killed at the Battle of Shiloh, for example. The highest ranking Confederate officer to die in battle at any point, but a lot of other general officers too. People don't realize until they look how it was shocking how many generals got killed and wounded in that battle. And you'll experience that in the game too. You're going to lose some guys.
Okay. Well, let's do this. What I want to close with is probably, and this is something nobody's seen yet either. We do make the rules available from the Kickstarter page and from our product page. So everybody can read the rules to the game, and that really helps a lot, I think. But what's not shared, and I want to get into maybe the naval aspects of the game, because I think that's one of the areas you really focused on for this new design. And that is, I want to share the playbook just for a moment. So here we have the playbook. And can you walk us through a little bit about the purpose of the playbook? And again, people are seeing this right now for the very first time. They might not even be aware there's a playbook included with the game, but if you could provide us a little overview of what the playbook will do.
The playbook is a learning path into the game, first and foremost. So you have comprehensive example of play, which walks through about the first 2 or 3 turns, I think, of the game.
Yep.
Basically replaying the history as the game. This is what the historical campaign would look like. Then we have scenarios. So there are 2 introductory scenarios. One which is the capture of Fort Donelson, so you can just learn about the basics of that by fighting that little one. And then Island Number 10. So you learn about the Island Number 10 and how to handle that situation. So between those 2, you learn the land and the naval aspects. Then we have the full-on scenario, which has a couple of variants to it. In this official records, there's a great document from General Beauregard on the southern side proposing this advance into Kentucky, which would have taken a whole lot more troops. But basically, there's a scenario where you can presume Beauregard got some of those reinforcements, and you can go try it, and, see if you can do what he was planning to do. And then a lot of supplemental materials, which I think are really nice. Some articles written by the developers and historical background and so forth, which I think people will find really interesting. So we tried to make this a complete package for folks to enjoy.
Yeah, here's the supplementary article starting right here. Just let everybody know on page 27. So lots of information. What I want to do is take a moment to let you share with everybody a bit more about one area. What part of the system did you really maybe take a new look at and do like a complete redesign on? Maybe you could share with folks how. And I want to mention, by the way, I think this is very important. Island Number 10 is brand new. So even those that had the original game, this is a completely new battle that's covered in this new edition. But Naval, tell us a little bit about what happened with Naval with this game.
Well, John, I've been quoted as saying that if you don't completely redesign at least one system during playtesting, you're not trying hard enough. And
that's true.
In this case, it was the naval game, the naval scenario. The initial naval system was too detailed. I went the other way. We had so much source material that there were separate tables for this, that, and the other, and so forth. And so after seeing the playtesters encounter this and hearing their comments, I threw it all away, which I'm sometimes aggressive about doing. Just threw it all away, clean sheet, start again. I think the new one is much more manageable, but it does still show the things that are important. Of course, the importance of the gunboats, the importance of the Confederate forts, the importance of suppressing those forts in order to move and so forth, and the critical abilities of the transports to carry troops around, which was just absolutely essential to the campaign.
Great. So, I think in a nutshell, as we get ready to close here, we're really talking, and that was the purpose of this 3-part series, was really to talk about this as a completely new design, something it sounds like you're really excited to do with all the new source material and the new approach, which, again, going to the box-based movement, point to point, that was something back in the 80s that really couldn't happen. I know you tried once and skinned your knees on it. So lots of changes in this one. But as a reminder for everybody, if you're catching these interviews right when we post them, we've got the Kickstarter live right now. So again, the Kickstarter is live right now. It's going to be live at time of this recording for another 8 days. But again, just a reminder, if you're watching this post Kickstarter, the game's available on the Compass website as well. So just a reminder again in closing that we're talking about Grant, the Western Campaign of 1862. And John, I'll leave closing comments with you. I think we covered a lot in the first 3 parts. I think we've talked about the new additions to the game with the battles and the new approach and the system like you said, you're redone. So talked about the comparison to great campaigns, why it makes sense. So I'll leave the final word with you on our 3-part series here.
Well, it's an amazing campaign, so I hope people will try it out. There's nothing else quite like it in the Civil War. It's the beginning of the ascent, of course, of the greatest Union general, Grant. This is where his career starts, but so many missed opportunities for the Confederates as well, like we talked about. So a lot of what ifs, the prospect of things really decisive happening. Things could have gone the other way. I hope people will come check it out. It's been a privilege to do it and to work with Compass.
Yeah, thanks for sitting with us today, sharing with everybody more about your design. And it's a privilege for us to have it at Compass on Kickstarter and both available direct as well. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate the discussion.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.